from the U.S. government sending these out overnight. Last night, President Trump announcing that the U.S. launched a powerful and deadly strike, they say, against forces of the Islamic State group in Nigeria. Comes after spending weeks, President Trump was, accusing the West African country's government of failing to rein in the targeting of Christians. A military official told the Associated Press that the U.S. worked with Nigeria to carry out the strikes, and the strikes were approved by Nigeria. Retired Marine Intelligence Officer, National Security Analyst, and host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kemper, is standing by. Hal is here. So Hal, Nigeria's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that the cooperation included exchange of intelligence as well as strategic coordination. So what's the rationale behind why Nigeria is helping carry out operations like this within their own country?
Well, Austin, you may recall when this thing kicked off that, President Trump was talking about the mass killings of Christians in Nigeria. There were a number of scenarios on how we would do this. And of course, the most likely one is we would work out some sort of cooperative effort with Nigeria. Now, there is a joint task force. It's actually a coalition joint task force headed up by Nigeria that actually focuses on dealing with these same extremist groups. It doesn't appear that we're a member of that, but I have a feeling that we're kind of working in concert with them. And it was released today that the Nigerians are actually providing us target intelligence on what to hit. That's actually very advantageous from not just a intelligence standpoint, but also from a legal standpoint, which is that the host nation, if we can use that term, that the nation whose sovereign territory is being struck has actually said this is where the terrorists are, and this is what you should hit. So it's a very cooperative effort. Makes it a lot easier from an international legal standpoint when we're working in cooperation with that host nation. If we just hit them unilaterally without their cooperation, that many could say that that was an act of war because we struck another nation's sovereign territory. In this case, we avoid any sort of accusations on the international scene that would look like that.
As far as I've seen, the president has not mentioned the extent of damage caused by the strikes or even specifically what or who was struck. Do we have any indication of anything relating to what exactly was targeted and how much damage was done? Is that something we don't have a lot of clarity on at this point?
Well, it's interesting. They said ISIL. ISIL is Islamic State of basically the Levant region, which that's the Islamic State that was over in Iraq and Syria, and that is completely remote from what we see. I'm not saying that they don't have, but what you see there is one is a group called that was more affiliated or associated with Al Qaeda, which is Boko Haram. They've been around for a long time. They're the one that is famous for going in there and kidnapping lots of schoolgirls. Their whole group is dedicated to stopping the education of girls. It's a Islamic extremist group. Certainly, some would say have a lot of same beliefs as they share with the Islamic State, but there is a separate group called the Islamic State of the West African Province, and that is the Islamic State presence in that region, the Chad Basin region and northern Nigeria, and that's probably where we focus most of those strikes. But again, it isn't quite clear. It's not quite clear all the weapons, all the munitions that we used to hit them. It's not entirely clear where all those munitions came from. Obviously, you see from the video that some of it came from a ship, but there's also, one time we had a base in Niger, which would be a likely place that we would have launched something from to do these strikes, but that was closed down when there was a military coup there, and they essentially kicked the U.S. out of the country, and so we don't have a base there. My understanding is that we do operate some reconnaissance aircraft out of Ghana, but I would imagine that any nation in West Africa would want us to be holding back on revealing whether they allowed us basing rights or something like that could have been used in these strikes, because if it went public, it would make them a potential target for these same extremist groups.
So, President Trump, and by the way, a live look at the White House, the time in the nation's capital, 7:12. So has President Trump said anything about and let me actually rephrase this. President Trump has said that the airstrikes were launched against militants who have been killing innocent Christians. I've also read, Hal, that Nigeria's security crisis affects Muslims too. So generally, to give our audience a general understanding of why this is taking place and why the U.S. is feeling the need to carry these strikes out, how are Christians, Muslims, and other groups in general targeted in Nigeria?
Well, first off, Nigeria, the northern part of the country, this is probably an oversimplification. The northern part of the country is predominantly Muslim. The southern part of the country is predominantly Christian. Most of the stuff where you see them targeting Christians is in the northern part of the country. With that said, that we're talking Al Qaeda and Islamic State affiliated extremist groups. Yes, they target Christians, and they have disproportionately targeted Christian groups. They've gone in, wiped out whole villages, they kidnap girls, they do all sorts of things. With that said, there is also something that they strongly believe in, which is that the many of the Muslims they believe represent an apostate, which is they're Muslim in name only, shall we say, that they don't believe that they're true Muslims. And in that regard, they feel they have a right to go in and attack them as disbelievers, unbelievers, non-believers, in the same way that they would attack, people of other faiths like Christianity. And so it gives them a kind of in their mind, to go in there and attack Muslims. And usually these are just Muslims that don't support their group. So yes, they target them as well. So there is a lot of Muslims that are killed, but in the northern part of the country, it does sway towards more Christians are killed. That's not to say that's the only amount of, violence and killing that goes on in all of Nigeria, but that is kind of a breakdown of the country.
So, how much of a presence does the U.S. military actually have in and around Africa? It's diminished in recent years, hasn't it?
Well, it has, and part of it was we had that base in Niger, which was an air base. It was a special operations base, and we did a lot of things out of that. That was closed down this year, and that was due to the military coup, and they realigned differently. The other thing that we also see in Africa is departure of the French presence. For a very long time in those French-speaking countries, there was a French military presence. The famous Foreign Legion was down there, and a lot of these French military forces, the French military presence, has been kicked out by these countries. A lot of them in the Sahel region, where a military coup has taken place, and they said we want the French out. And in many cases, they invited the Russians in, which, believe me, was great consternation to the U.S. and others that they allowed them to come into the country. I don't think it's really working out for those countries too well. The Russians really don't bring as much as they like to advertise they bring. But we do operate to some extent, and throughout the region, we have we do training exercises and other things in there. We have a presence. We do have a logistics air base near Accra in Ghana that we operate out of, but we don't have any big bases. In fact, the only formal big military base that we even have in Africa is in Djibouti, which is in East Africa, completely on the other side. So it's very difficult to launch strikes there because just the tyranny of distance. It's a long way away from anything.
Hal and I have much more to discuss, including Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. He's going to be meeting with President Trump in Florida on Sunday. Zelensky telling journalists that the two leaders will discuss security guarantees, territorial